So I don't understand why people don't get excited about sleep. It's like ho hum. It's a big yawner. Pardon the terrible puns, but sleep is such a big issue. And you can tell people just don't get excited about sleep. We had Parm Reddy over on the video talking a little bit about some aspects of sleep. I'm going to be talking about some aspects as well. One of my favorite books on health we'll be talking about today. I've actually, believe it or not, read it 8 times. And I've read it, I listen to it when I'm going to sleep. It helps me go to sleep. We'll talk a little bit about that book and sleep today. Before we do, just a couple of introductory comments. We finally got this. It's our YouTube play button for 100,000 subscribers. As you can see, unlike Daryl Eves and some of the big YouTubers, I don't have a bookshelf in back of me with this sitting on the bookshelf. I've been too cheap for that. I've put our money into providing content, developing content, and making content available for folks around the world. And folks around the world have recognized it. Again, it's not just an America thing. It's a little bit less than half of our viewers now are in the US. The rest is all over the globe. So welcome. If a good early morning, if you're in maybe the Pacific, good evening, good afternoon if you're in Europe. And let's talk a little bit about some of the other content this course, this channel has to offer. And then we'll get into a lot more detail about why sleep is really so important, despite the fact that you may think it's a yawner. We're doing a series covering the Prevention Myths book. The Prevention Myths book is all about several different myths. One of the most common being, "Hey doc, my uncle died of a heart attack. Why don't we get a stress test just to make sure that I'm safe?" That's the wrong thing to do. Stress tests can't predict a heart attack. And we talk about why that's the case. In that book, though, we talk about all the different ways that plaque is important. Plaque in our arteries drives heart attack and stroke, the number one killer, the number one disabler. And yet we don't really use the best methods for assessing plaque in our arteries. So that's what the book's about. We've got a series covering that. The last week, I think it was, we covered coronary artery calcium score. It came out. If you haven't seen the movie Widowmaker, you should. It's a great movie. And if you haven't had a calcium score and you're 50 or 60 or more, you should probably consider it. But again, just take a look at the content, take a look at the video, and you'll learn a lot more about this. You'll probably learn, you will. You'll learn more than most doctors know about it. As I mentioned, we've covered some other components of sleep with Dr. Dadia. We will continue along the sleep series as well. And one of our more popular videos over the past few weeks has been this article that came out about low-carb diet causing coronary artery calcium and therefore heart attack risk. What? If you have questions about it, check out the video. If you're new to the channel, so here's what we're all about. We're all about helping people understand the most likely reasons for them to die or to become disabled. So because they're preventable. Once you know about it, you can prevent it. The other thing is most people depend on their doctor to understand that. And unfortunately, the medical community is still really wrapped up in very few things like LDL, cholesterol. Although cholesterol is important, it pales in importance compared to insulin resistance. Now, or prediabetes and diabetes. If you actually look at the statistics, they're horrifying. They should be horrifying. It's, but people are just okay with it. Over 90% of us who have this problem don't know it. We have no clue. And if you've ever heard your doc say, "Oh, you've got a touch of sugar," be afraid. Be very afraid. In fact, if you look at the science, the evidence, the majority of doctors, primary care doctors, family practitioners, cardiologists, internists, really don't understand the details of insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes, enough to diagnose it well, let alone to manage it. So that's what this channel is all about, helping people understand that. We do get into a lot of other preventive topics, but those are the key ones. We've developed courses, we've developed webinars, we've developed multiple ways where you as a patient can learn what you need to know and what you cannot depend on your doctor to know. So again, be aware, beware, and learn what you need to do to learn to save your life. These were just some of the ways that we're providing the information. The prevention myths is an offshoot of that information. It's the whole idea that, again, let me just get a stress test, and if it's okay, I'm fine. For those of you who don't know, that's exactly what Tim Russert did, and many, many other people passed the stress test with flying colors and then died of a heart attack. So be very careful about depending on a stress test. Now, we're going to go into the topic for today, unlocking the secrets of sleep, preventing diabetes and heart disease. What? I mean, what's the connection there? You'll see in just a minute. Again, it's one of the reasons why I'm so focused on sleep and so frustrated that so few people actually take a look about sleep and study it. The book that I mentioned, the book that I've read at least 8 times, and here's the thing, it's been at least 8 times, and I've listened to it so many times, so many different sections of this book, that I know it's at least 8, but I'm sure it's more. And again, as I said, I often use it to fall asleep. And I wake up early in the morning. I have this problem of early morning awakening. I'll wake up at 2, 3 in the morning sometimes and have trouble going back to sleep. This is my favorite book to use to go back to sleep. Now, why am I so interested in it? And I have no financial arrangements. I don't make any money off of selling this book. This is for this is for the channel's sake, for your sake, to help people understand that we don't have to die. We don't have to suffer from heart attacks and strokes as often as we do. And this is one of the key reasons. Why is sleep so important? Well, let's get into the discussion today, into the script. Sleep is very puzzling. It's not just a puzzling human behavior. There are very few living creatures that don't have some component of sleep in their behavior. It enriches a diversity of brain functions, the ability to learn, to memorize, choice making. It restocks the immune system. It fine-tunes the balance of insulin and glucose. It regulates our appetite. It maintains a flourishing microbiome. It lowers blood pressure. Dreams provide a neurochemical bath that mollifies the painful memories and gets us ready, prepares us again for a new day and new challenges. It's like a virtual reality space. So we spend all this effort and money and time developing virtual reality. Meanwhile, we're neglecting it in terms of dreams. Sleep is the foundation of good health. The shorter your sleep, the shorter your life. This is from an article in the European Heart Journal. Again, we continue to talk about hearts, and you'll see why as we go through this presentation. Unhealthy sleep equals an unhealthy heart. A 2011 study found that short sleep was associated with more than 45% risk of coronary heart disease 7 to 20 years after the study. A Japanese study found that sleeping less than 6 hours was associated with 3 times greater risk of heart attack and stroke. Just 1 hour of modest sleep deprivation increases the heart rate and systolic blood pressure. A study at Chicago University reported that previously healthy individuals who sleep 6 hours or less were 2 to 300%, 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer coronary artery calcification. So again, one of the key things that we want to do with this channel is help people go back to the root causes of heart attack and stroke. And yes, most of the medical community is going to be focused on cholesterol. We're going to focus a lot more on hidden insulin resistance. And one of the major drivers for hidden insulin resistance is this lack of restorative sleep. Now, what has restorative sleep got to do with all this? Well, the sympathetic nervous system plays a key role. You remember the sympathetic nervous system is adrenaline. It's fight or flight. And guess what else? It's cortisol. You remember cortisol? That gets us geared up and ready there's a thing called dawn effect. Where, again, we get an increase in cortisol, we get an increase in blood sugar. It happens between usually 3 to 5 a.m. in the morning. And to think of it in terms of function, you think, well, it's getting us ready to hunt, ready to go into our challenging day. And that's okay. But again, with inadequate sleep, we start running too much on cortisol. And that maybe helps you start to connect the dots where you'll hear us say time and time again, inadequate sleep leads to heart attack and stroke. And there's an issue with insulin resistance in there. Yes, inadequate sleep leads to insulin resistance. If you test patients in a sleep lab and they have inadequate sleep, they will have more insulin resistance for the next 48 hours after having inadequate sleep. So guess what happens after you have inadequate sleep day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade? You never calm down that sympathetic nervous system. You never slow down that cortisol. So it's living on fight or flight. With insufficient sleep, the body remains in some degree of fight or flight state. An overactive sympathetic nervous system has increased levels of the stress hormone, cortisol. Sleep deprivation triggers the domino effect. With lack of sleep, there's less growth hormone, increasing the risk of damage to the endothelium, the lining of the artery walls. And for those of you who have been on this channel before, you know that that's where the action is. The endothelial lining of the artery wall, the endothelium, we also call it the intima. That's where the primary damage starts occurring. There's a thing called the glycocalyx. It's like little hairs that come off from the inside lining. That glycocalyx is where the metabolic processes occur. Glucose and other nutrients are dropped off in the bloodstream, and oxygen. Carbon dioxide, on the other hand, cell waste materials are picked up at that calyx of the intima or endothelial lining. When we have blood sugar that stays too high for too long, or even insulin levels that stay too high for too long, we damage that glycocalyx. When we damage the glycocalyx, then there's a process called transcytosis. Trans meaning through, cytosis meaning going through the cell. So it's not holes in the endothelium that we used to think. We used to think holes in the endothelium led to plaque getting stuck in that artery wall. That's not what happens. There are no holes in the endothelium. What happens is the LDL, especially small, dense LDL, goes through that damaged intima cell and gets stuck between the intima cell and the media. For those of you who've attended the channel, we've covered bits and pieces of that many, many times. And again, today we're going back to a very, very root cause of a lot of this problem. That's why I get so excited about sleep and so frustrated that so many people pay attention. With sleep, there's less growth hormone, increasing the damage to the endothelium and predisposing that damaged endothelium and artery to plaque. Now, some things that Parm mentioned this before. He talked about different types of sleep, where the first half of our sleep, number one, we go in and out of sleep and these sleep levels multiple times, many, many times per night. But there's some patterns that you can see. For example, in the latter half of sleep, early morning, that's when we tend to see REM, rapid eye movement. That's what that stands for. And rapid eye movement is when we're dreaming. That's a very critical, important phase of sleep. It's associated with it's a type of deep sleep. And the neurons, the actual nerves within our brain shrink to allow cleaning with neurolymphatics. In other words, the immune system, the lymphatic system of our brain actually bathes the nerves of our brain during REM sleep when we're dreaming. And again, sleep studies have demonstrated that if you don't get healthy REM sleep, you get into major problems in terms of emotional issues as well as the ability to learn. Now, that's the second half of sleep. The first half of sleep, as Parm discussed a couple of weeks ago, is deep sleep. Deep sleep is critical as well in some other areas. Deep sleep prevents fight or flight, sympathetic stimuli. It's a healing type of process. It prevents escalation of physiological stress. Now, let's think about it. Let's go back and think about a critical issue. So, Brewer, you're getting really emotional and doing a rant about sleep. That's like, okay, I'll sleep tomorrow. That's what we always hear. I'll sleep tomorrow. Today, I've got some stuff I need to do. Well, and so there's the assumption that sleep doesn't have that close of a connection. Well, consider this. Studies have been done in the Northern Hemisphere showing that when we switch to daylight saving time in March, in other words, we get up an hour earlier than we've been used to getting up during the winter and spring. That results in the loss of 1 hour of sleep for many, many people. And guess what? We get a spike of heart attacks that day. You may not believe it. Don't believe it? Just take a look. So the connection might actually be a lot closer and a lot more immediate than most of us tend to think. So what about eating? So, we talked about our blood sugar going up. We talked about being more insulin resistant because of cortisol, probably, and maybe some other things as well, in terms of how our sleep usually manages multiple hormones. We also eat more. The body becomes unable to manage these calories effectively. especially blood glucose levels. One study that included non-diabetic participants found that after 1 week of sleep deprivation for 4 hours, 40% were less effective at absorbing standard glucose. Another study showed that after restricted sleep, cells become less receptive to insulin. Again, increasing our insulin resistance. Another study from Chicago University found that after 2 days of sleep deprivation, leptin levels decrease, ghrelin levels increase, and as we said, not only do you become more insulin resistant with these other hormones, you want to eat more. So it's just a multiple compounding factors in terms of poor sleep being a big deal for health. And one of the key mechanisms for doing that is driving insulin resistance. So in summary, consequences of bad sleep are a decreased immune system function, increased risk of certain forms of cancer, which we didn't even mention today. But yes, that's true as well. And think about it. Think about the connection of insulin resistance and diabetes to certain cancers. Then it becomes clear. Yeah, there are significant connections to cancers. Increased risk of Alzheimer's. We didn't talk about that today either. And again, for those of you that have seen the channel, that are familiar with it, that should not be a surprise to you at all. You understand that a lot of the current world's researchers are basically calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. So, and obviously you get increased insulin resistance, risk of prediabetes, diabetes, increased risk of coronary artery disease, stroke, congestive heart failure, increased levels of ghrelin, shorter lifespan, telomere damage. It can be deadly. Now, speaking of deadly, that actually brings up yet another point. There are 3 ways that poor sleep kills people, and it kills a lot of people a lot of times. And we've covered a couple of them, or we've covered one of them. We've covered the linkage with insulin resistance and heart attacks, but we haven't covered fatal insomnia. Believe it or not, there are some types of insomnia that are just completely fatal. You die from lack of sleep. Now, admittedly, that's actually really rare. In those cases, people almost totally lose their ability to sleep. And when that diagnosis is made, usually it's like a cancer, a very serious cancer. Usually that patient's got about 2 years to live. You probably haven't heard about that kind of fatal insomnia because it's unusual. But there's another very, very common way for people to die from lack of sleep, and it's called microsleep. Microsleep is when you're nodding. You're doing something else, and you nod, and you have a little half a second of sleep. Guess what? The numbers are just compelling and astronomical in terms of that happening and creating car accidents and death on the highway. So again, I've had my rant this morning about sleep. What we will do next is we'll go to the Q&A period as soon as Aspen gives us the... So thanks. We've got several comments with me starting it off saying, you know what, more about sleep today. It's critical. People ignore it. Believe it or not, the day we switch to daylight savings time, there are more heart attacks. 48 hours after poor sleep, we have more insulin resistance. So Amer Al-Gayer from Germany. Hello, Amer. Great to see you. I'm sorry, do I have Gilbert or Aspen with me today?
Aspen, Doc.
Thank you. I thought so, Aspen. So,
okay, you're welcome.
Aspen has showed us this, and he's posted a way for you to find more videos if you have an interest. We've got a lot of content, pushing 1,000 videos at this point. Mary Withy, congratulations on the 100,000 subscribers. I'm from Texas, by the way. Thank you so much, Mary. We've got a lot of folks from Texas, and we've got a lot of folks, period. A lot of folks are finding the content very helpful. So Aspen also has posted the Jubilee Primary Care up in the right-hand corner. So Jubilee, I've mentioned many times our Alabama project. For those of you who are Medicare age, we're setting up and running now a series of clinics in Baldwin County, which unless you live there, you may not know where that is. You might have heard of LA. I'm not talking about Los Angeles. I'm talking about Lower Alabama. I'm talking about Gulf Shores. Now, most people that aren't from the area have heard of Gulf Shores. And most people have also heard of Mobile. So we're setting up clinics which focus on prevention and provide very high quality care that you're not likely to get on the street. So thank you very much, Aspen, for posting that for us. DCAP, is it okay to take medication to help getting sleep if all fails? Haven't taken yet. Any long-term side effects like dependence or habit forming? Too much stress because dog is sick and can't sleep. Well, I'm sorry about your dog being sick. I'm very concerned about your ability to sleep. And I'm really glad you brought up that point. We didn't deal with that in the script today, but that's a huge point. In fact, if you look at the Medicare Advantage programs, one of the things that HEDIS has mentioned is taking medications, being dependent on medications to sleep. And if you look, yes, there's a very good section, very dramatic section in that book about taking anything to sleep. For sure, any of the prescription medications, but even just things like Benadryl, you do become very dependent on those very quickly. And in fact, like most dependencies, what happens is you develop a resistance to these things to help you sleep. Yet you also lose the appropriate healthy components of sleep. So you get a double whammy. As I mentioned, I've got major sleep challenges myself. I started having early morning awakening when I was in my late 20s. And I just, at that point, that was not known. So I used to take a lot of Benadryl to help sleep. But what's now known is that, again, it gets you to where it doesn't help you to sleep, but it does decrease the quality of your sleep. The other thing that these things do, even over the counters, anything that makes you want to go to sleep, alcohol, Benadryl, any of the prescription Lunesta, any of the prescription drugs, they're also a risk for falling when you do get up, if you have to get up and go to the bathroom. So avoid those like the plague. Dee, thank you so much for bringing that up. Fort Worth West Side. Any ideas on removing hard plaque using rotational atherectomy device that pulverizes plaque to a size similar to red blood cells to allow passage through the vessels without issues? Yes, Fort Worth. That's a very common perception. A lot of folks think about it, and it just makes sense. Unfortunately, doesn't work. So Fort Worth, if you see anything that indicates that it's really working, something other than the inventor talking about how great his invention is, or a primary researcher, a chief investigator in a survey. If you see something, a chief investor in a survey saying, yeah, I think this might work. If you see something other than that, I'd really like to know, because there are a couple of problems with it. Number one, this is more of a metabolic issue than it is a mechanical issue. It's not so much a flow and plumbing issue. It's an immune system issue, inflammation. So we can talk about that later if people have questions. So Tired Looking for Name. Thank you so much again. Tired Looking for Name gave us a super chat button. Thank you very much. Extremely important topic. You've already mentioned importance of physical exercise for good sleep. But what if that is not enough? Could we talk about supplementation, GABA, tryptophan, melatonin? Great question. And the debate, the stories still to be told. There's a lot of active debate on that. For a long time, we thought, melatonin is going to be a healthy way of doing it. And there's still a lot of people who are saying, yep, melatonin is healthy. But believe it or not, there is yet another side to that debate, Tired Looking for Name. I've personally tried melatonin. I've tried tryptophan. I haven't tried GABA. I never really got much of an impact from them anyway. So it really, on a personal basis, I wasn't surprised when I saw so much debate and so little evidence in the literature that these are the science, that these things actually help. I appreciate your striving. I'm striving too. I have a major challenge getting enough sleep. Thank you so much, Tired Looking for Name, for the contribution, because as well as the great question, it's very helpful to talk about supplements. So many people live on and believe and put their hopes on supplements for so many things, including sleep. And I would be overjoyed to be proven wrong and to be shown with clear evidence that, yes, there are supplements that actually work. I would love for that to happen. And I'd be the first to stand up and say, gosh, I was wrong. And I'm so glad, because I'd be the first to be taking some of them. Thank you for something else, Tired Looking for Name. Thank you for that contribution, that super chat. For those of you who are unaware, a large portion of our team is production team, like Aspen today, is in the Philippines. We've got another portion of our team in Mexico, and both of those economies are very, very different. Something like $20 that Tired Looking for Name just donated through that super chat helps us get this kind of critical information out to people all over the world. So thank you again. I think we've covered that. Sharon Steele, Illinois. Thank you so much, Sharon, for letting us know where you are. Per Johnson, what about PWV? I don't speak that acronym, Per, if you'll have to be a little bit more specific. Fort Worth West Side, would that procedure be better than having a stent as long as your lifestyle changes are implemented too? Well, I think you're talking about that procedure where you get that Roto-Rooter. And again, that Roto-Rooter procedure is based on an assumption that A, you're going to find the one plaque that is friable, ready to pop. And that B, it's not really a friable plaque. It's just plumbing. It's just opening up that area. Again, that's not the way this happens. It's not that you get a clog in an area and you want to take a Roto-Rooter down there and unclog it, unjam it. It's that when plaque gets inflamed, our immune system attacks it. It becomes liquid. And in fact, let me give you a quote, Fort Worth and the others who are thinking about the plumbing mechanism. When Tim Russert died from a heart attack after passing his stress test, they did a very early autopsy. When they opened his arteries up, they said his arteries, the inside of his arteries in the heart, looked like the pimply face of a teenager with a bad case of acne. And sure enough, one of those pimples inside that artery in his heart had burst, spewing that inflamed liquid plaque into the artery and into the bloodstream. That inflamed liquid plaque caused a clot. The clot caused the heart attack. So as you begin to understand, that's really how a heart attack works, you begin to drop this assumption that we can find that one plaque, that one blockage that's causing the problem. It's not one plaque. It's not one blockage. The susceptible plaque theory doesn't hold up. It doesn't work. So the more you begin to understand that pimple mechanism and that it's a clot that kills us, not the plaque. And the clot comes from hot or liquid plaque that's full of immune system components, which cause the blood to form a clot. So hopefully that helps. And as you can see, I've repeated it a few times. I'll end up, that's one of the things I do for a living. I have to repeat that statement over and over because everybody's so focused on the plumbing mechanism of heart disease. Per Johnson, does hemoglobin A1C show prediabetes? It's very helpful. One thing I would help, you bring up a great point, Per, and let me give you a couple of points about this. So most doctors think that the best way to screen for prediabetes or diagnose diabetes is A1C. It's a great way to do it. I'm not going to say it isn't. But if you look up the AACE, the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists, they'll tell you this as well. It's not the best way to diagnose diabetes. Why is that? Because it depends on hemoglobin. And anything that impacts hemoglobin can and will impact hemoglobin A1C. So that's why I don't recommend just screening with an A1C. Now, if you start looking at patterns, most docs don't screen for diabetes or prediabetes anyway. That's the biggest part, and that's the biggest problem. But then there's a second problem. Of those that do, most of them think that A1C is the best way to screen. That's another problem. But a bigger problem than that is even those don't use A1C. They tend to just use the old fasting glucose. And that's even worse. Fasting glucose is even far worse than hemoglobin A1C. So there's going to be some people out there saying that, oh, well, you know what? The definitive test is really a thing called HOMA-IR. HOMA-IR is just it's a ratio between fasting glucose and insulin. Now that does help. It does improve it beyond just fasting glucose. But think about it. If fasting glucose is the worst way to screen for prediabetes, how could the ratio of fasting glucose and insulin really be that much better? And I can tell you it's not. What you have to do is challenge the body's metabolism. Have the fast for at least 8 hours, then take measure glucose and insulin when you're fasting, then take a challenge, 75, 80, or 100 grams of glucose. It's a syrupy. Some people like it if they really like sweet tastes. Most people, especially on low-carb diets, have gotten away from that and don't like it. But then what you do is you measure that glucose, your blood glucose values at half an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and 4 hours. Now, there's several different mechanisms or formats for this test. The full-blown Kraft insulin survey uses 100 grams of glucose, and they measure at every one of those time periods, half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and some even 4. Now, we're not able to get that through the testing that we do through Quest Labs, but we are able to get 75 gram glucose challenge. We're also able to get 1 hour fasting and 1 hour and 2 hour glucose values. So per Johnson, that's how you measure prediabetes. Thank you for asking that question. It gave me a great chance to go down that bunny hole. Jonathan Hull, good morning, Dr. Brewer. Do you recommend any particular watch or ring to monitor sleep quality? Is any of them more accurate than the other? I don't know on that. As you can tell, I use my own little Fitbit. I didn't use these things for a long time because I had so many problems and frustrations with lack what I consider to be lack of accuracy. I will tell you though, even this device, it's about $100. And no, I have no financial connection to that either. I have learned so much from this little $100 device about sleep. It gives me a sleep score. What it does is it looks at your heart rate during times while you're asleep. It's a very, very interesting set of numbers, the report that you get back out of that. Are there better ways of doing it? I've heard people swear on a thing called the Aura Ring, that they really love that. I'm just not an expert yet in terms of wearables. But I have become a convert with a cheap little $100 Fitbit telling me a lot about my sleep. So thanks for asking, Jonathan. Heck Lance. Heck, where are you from? We're getting through to the people. Don't ever get, you were getting through to the people. Don't ever get discouraged. Thank you so much, Heck. You don't break the stone with one blow, just a little at a time. I'm a very appreciative Canadian. Thank you again. It's wonderful to have somebody from Canada. My brother and sister-in-law live there, and I appreciate the encouragement, and I appreciate you letting us know where you're from, where you live. Adam Schmitz, per Eric Johnson. Yes, I think the threshold for prediabetes is any A1C over 5.7. Let me tell you something. If you get an A1C of 5.5, again, be afraid, be very afraid, and don't depend on that. Get the test that we talked about. James Cantor, good video on sleep. Thank you, Dr. Brewer. Thank you, James, and thank you for your regular attendance. Thank you for your comments and support. Fort Worth West Side, can one sleep too long even though they're tired feeling? Guessing the cause of excessive tiredness would need to be explored as well. That's actually where I was going with that question, Fort Worth. You have to take a look at other things. Now, they do mention people and their needs for sleep. It's amazing the number of people that say, I don't need as much sleep as other people. I do fine on 3, 4, 5, 6 hours of sleep. 6 hours is you hear it a lot. 6 hours is my critical piece. Again, be concerned. There are people that only need 6 hours, but it's not very common, not nearly as common as you hear. And in fact, most people need about 7 to 7.5. Believe it or not, it is what it is. And to your point, you asked about too long a sleep. I went to the other end. Too long a sleep, again, the big issue is what's causing too long a sleep. Is there illness? Is there some mental health issues? Are there other things that are causing this? Beyond that, yes, there are people that need even more than 7.5 hours sleep, but not very many. Peter Utsi, can too much sleep be bad as well? Well, Peter, you in Fort Worth must be in tune there. Salam Lalem, worried I oversleep daily, 10 hours or more. I'd be worried too. I would want to understand a little bit better because I don't think most people need 10 hours of sleep. One of the things I would ask you is take a look. Have you got something like one of these to measure just when you're asleep and when you're awake? Because a lot of us are awake a significant portion of the night and don't even know it because we don't remember it. If you watch a baby sleep or a dog or a puppy, you'll see them wake up for a few minutes, be a little bit confused, maybe not be totally there, and then go back to sleep. Many of us get much longer periods of that, but still don't remember it. So again, there's a lot of questions you have to ask around, am I sleeping too much? But I'll say this, to every one of you worried about sleeping too much, I'm jealous. I struggle to get 7.5 hours. My body just wakes up and it doesn't want to go back to sleep. And if I lose more weight, I get I sleep less and less. When I gain, that's one of the things that makes my body want to set point at a higher weight, more like a 23, 24 kind of level. When I'm in the 21s, 22 levels, On BMI, I tend to struggle more with getting sleep. Sophia, hi doc, can't fall asleep without lorazepam. Does this mean I have poor sleep even if I have 7 to 8 hours using a sleep aid? I'd be very concerned about requiring a prescription medication, especially, like a benzodiazepine. That's obviously even worse than something like an over-the-counter like Benadryl. Bill H., good morning from Brentwood. Good morning, Bill. I've been convinced that a big part of my positive calcium score is sleep-related. I will tell you, Bill, you're not alone. A lot of folks, and I've talked with several knowledgeable endocrinologists who also share this concern, this theory that, maybe a lot of the progression into prediabetes and diabetes has sleep loss as a major root. So thank you for sharing that about sleep and your calcium score. So Bill goes on to say, started using CPAP in early 2016 after my wife noticed me stop breathing in my sleep. Oh, you bring up another really huge point. It's called sleep apnea. And it's so interesting. Pardon me, but you need to take a look at some of the sleep apnea videos on YouTube. People just stop breathing. Guess what happens to your body every time that happens? You get major firing of your sympathetic nervous system, your adrenaline, cortisol. Again, it's like adrenaline and cortisol. We're living on it. And if you have sleep apnea, you're bathing in it. So tired looking for name. That's that super chat button we talked about. Thank you again, Tired. Decap. Isn't melatonin natural though? Not medication, I mean. Yes, absolutely. So many supplements are natural. They're not medications. But you look at most medications, one of the major reasons for big pharma to look at developing a drug was taking a supplement. I can't imagine a class of drugs that gets beat up on more than statins. And guess what? Statins started as a supplement. The supplement was called red rice yeast. So now and so many people still think that. They think, well, red rice yeast is healthy because it's a supplement, and statins are not because they're a prescription drug. Where did you get that? And where do we get that? And is that true? Yes, but to your point about melatonin, D, yes, our brain even makes melatonin and uses it to control our sleep pattern. But then there's several questions. Well, how much does our brain make? Where does it need to go? Does it need to go into our stomach? Is that what actually creates the problem or creates the healthy sleep? And if so, are we getting the right dose? There are so many questions that we just leave up to chance when we take something like melatonin. I'm not saying that that I'm convinced melatonin's a bad thing. I'm just saying, yes, melatonin is very natural. Our body makes it. But there's so much we don't know about what we're doing when we take it. We've heard of it, we see it, we take some and we hope it works. That's the concern. Or that's one of the reasons why I would say, you can take melatonin. I will say this, there are some people who would make a case that melatonin can actually cause problems. When I review the science, number one, it's not nearly what we need to see. But number two, I don't see significant evidence that melatonin is destroying something or is causing danger. But I also don't see a huge amount of evidence that it helps or that it helps on a daily basis. Decap. Isn't melatonin? Okay, so we covered that. Thank you, Dee. That was a great topic, a great question. Vagabond Sojourner. Vagabond's been here off and on many times. CBD, cannabis related, cannabidiol, non-THC, comes from the same plant, but a different version of the plant, and again doesn't have that tetrahydro cannabis in there. It's got a different chemical. And guess what? There's a lot of science that's being developed about CBD oil. I do take CBD oil. Just from one of the reasons, and I recommend it too. One of the reasons, I think there's a huge amount of science out there that's becoming available. And it actually turns out that we have a whole system of receptors to CBD oil. Am I sure that it's working? No, I actually, at the end of the day, have some of the same concerns that I have with melatonin. But yes, CBD oil is a great topic. If you haven't seen some of our content on CBD oil, just do YouTube Brewer CBD oil. Orville Nation. Hi, Dr. Brewer. Hello, Orville. Great to see you. Thank you for sharing. Peter Utzi again. Since we have always some glucose in our blood, what is the level, including acute postprandial, when it causes inflammation? So is there a limit we should keep our blood glucose spikes under? So that's not known for sure, Peter. What is known is this. Prediabetes clearly causes atherosclerosis. Now, if you look at, there's a book, Jenny Ruhl, R-U-H-L, and it's Blood Sugar 101. Jenny's got a really good chapter about this question in her book. And she's researched it about as much as anybody else has in this space. Her perspective is, look, if you get over 140, you're at a place where you're causing damage. I tend to think, again, she's about as correct and she's done about as much research as anybody else, and that's probably the number. I try to keep mine below 140. Now, here's one of the things you have to think about, though. So we have somebody who will come in, their blood sugars may be 90. They may be great fasting. But then as soon as they eat something, their blood sugar goes up to 160, 180. We have a lot of people that are full-blown diabetic, meaning their blood sugars go over 200. And guess what? They stay there hour after hour after hour. And that happens multiple times, every day, every week, every month, every year for decades. Guess what happens to their bloodstream? So it's sort of like there's a lot of things in life where you have to balance. You have to balance this. The bottom line is the lower you can keep it and stay healthy and not get hypoglycemic and fall or hurt or fall asleep at the wheel or do something like that, the lower the better. Again, assuming you maintain health in other spaces. If you look at 20-year-olds, teenagers, for example, Peter, young people that are very healthy, they'll tend to come in with blood sugars in the 80s. And they'll never go above 120, even when challenged. Many of them don't go over 100. So as you see, the folks that are healthier, their immune systems are healthier, their endocrine systems are healthier, their blood sugars are lower. So great question. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. Dr. Bax, Craig Bax is a Bale-Donine trained physician who's been doing a lot of work in this space. And actually, Dr. Bax and I have been meeting. We're looking at doing some stuff together. So I think, Craig, you'll be on in a week or two, a couple of weeks. A1C is useful to screen positive for IR if it's high. But if it's normal, it isn't sensitive enough to exclude insulin resistance. That's such a great way of saying that, Craig. Thank you for putting that in that comment. And I wish I'd thought of that. The most sensitive test is still the glucose tolerance test. So again, thank you so much, Craig. Great point. And let me just repeat that in case folks don't hear it. Yes, if it's high, it's a good, it tells you something. There's so many tests in medicine that are this way, that if they're one way, they tell you something. If they're another way, they don't really tell you anything. Same thing with A1C. If it's high, yep, you can rest assured you've got insulin resistance. But if it's low, not so much. You really need to do the GTT, the glucose tolerance test. Nathan Witter, can zinc be taken with simvastatin? I have never seen anything indicating that you could not. Is there a level of simvastatin milligrams at which taking zinc could be bad? No, again, I'm sure you will find it on the internet. You can find anything, especially in terms of drug interactions that you'd like to find, but I'm not aware of significant interactions between zinc and simvastatin. Vagabond Sojourner, if we assume anything, we should assume we are pre-diabetic. Exactly right. Let me stop here and say why Vagabond's statement is absolutely correct up to this point. Again, 2 or 3 facts. Even the CDC, who underestimates this, will say 90% of us that have prediabetes don't know it. Now, why do I say the CDC is wrong in terms of their estimate? They estimate that 1/3 of us have it. That's wrong. It's over half. If you look at studies from UCLA and now studies from JAMA, it's really clear. Over half of us have prediabetes. A lot of new information is coming out now that we've got things like the Freestyle Libre. So over half of us. The other thing that they tell us is, well, we all know, and it is very true, that we get more and more insulin resistant as we age. In fact, many people think the diabetes epidemic is due to us getting a heavier body fat. And that's partially true, but it's at least as true because we're getting older. Age is an even more powerful driver of insulin resistance. Now, here's the other point that was a gross underestimate by the CDC, that 1/3 of us have insulin resistance or diabetes. They're talking about 50 or 60 years old. If you look at it, it starts at age 30 in the UCLA study and in the JAMA studies. Starting at age 30, you look across the country, the US, everybody of those of us 30 years old or older, over half of us have insulin resistance. So now let me go back to Vagabond's comment. Thank you so much for making it, Vagabond. If we assume anything, we should assume we are pre-diabetic and take the correct lifestyle changes. Absolutely. I found that the use of continual glucose monitor to gauge glucose reaction to specific foods, not sure what the rest of that sentence was going to be, but thank you. It was a great comment, Vagabond. Mezzanine, BPH has made my long-time sleep challenges even more difficult. For those of you who don't know what BPH is, I'm assuming Mezzanine's talking about benign prostate hypertrophy. Now that algorithmic speak, initial speak, I do understand. And yes, for most of the attendees on this channel are 50 or older, and most of them are men, about 2/3 to 3/4. So it's a very important subject for this channel, for our population. The other thing to note is it tends to be related to hyperinsulinemia, too much insulin. Did you know that? If you didn't, you're not alone. Most people do not. Insulin is also related to an ILGH, insulin-like growth hormone. And it's like its twin brother. And that growth hormone can encourage the growth and the swelling of prostate cells. And as you said, yep, having BPH makes you get up at night. Per Johnson, what about pulse wave velocity? Yes, I've seen some evidence about pulse wave velocity, and let me just say this: if you want to depend on pulse wave velocity to break up your plaque, good luck. Again, it gets back to this continuing assumption that it's plaque that we want to break up in our arteries, and it's forgetting about the true mechanism of the blood flow stopping in our heart. It's not from the plaque; it's from a clot. And where does the clot come from? Not from stable plaque. The clot comes from inflamed plaque. So decap, and I'm one of those with normal A1C, but my postprandial goes to 200s. If it's into the 200s, that fits the definition of diabetes. And it's not just me saying that. It's even the ADA, American Diabetes Association, the ACC, American College of Cardiology. People agree with me. It's over 200, you've got diabetes. But as soon as I eat and do some bicycling, my sugar immediately is down to 160. My doctor doesn't want me to start on metformin. You bring up two other really good points. Number one, over 200 is you fit the diagnosis for diabetes. And if your doctor doesn't want to give you metformin and you've got diabetes, I'd be concerned. I really would. Look it up on anywhere, and don't look it up with crazy internet docs like me. Look it up with the American Diabetes Association. Look it up with the American College of Endocrinologists, the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists. Blood sugar over 200 anytime, and not wanting to take metformin. So that's a challenge. That's a problem. Now, you did bring up another point. You go out cycling and it's immediately down to 160. Well, as we mentioned before, there's a lot of evidence that 160 is still causing damage. Another point to this is you go out cycling. One of the key things that I like to do with diabetes self-care is put a little button on the back of people's arms. That button is called a Freestyle Libre. It gives us our blood sugar values 24/7 for 2 weeks. And what people, they have some frustration with it sometimes. Most often it's because they're taking over a gram of vitamin C. Vitamin C actually messes up anything that's measuring blood glucose. But let me go back. The people that do use these Libres and get some really good information out of it, there are 2 or 3 things that we typically see over and over again. Well, I didn't know my blood sugar dropped so much at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and it does. And blood pressure drops at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, right before it starts rising again. And that's been found to be healthy. Another thing that they find is, my son wanted to go out and have pizza and beer. I don't usually do that, but I took a carb vacation. I had some pizza and half of a beer. I knew my blood sugar was going to go up. My son went out to walk with me, and we just did a gentle walk for 15 minutes. And the spike on my blood sugar, which I knew I was going to have, stopped. It went away. It just cut the head right off of that spike. So even just gentle walking, D, is enough to pull that blood sugar, that sugar out of your bloodstream and into those hip, thigh, calf muscles as you're walking. So even gentle walking is a big, big deal for managing your blood sugar. It's like a safe endogenous shot of insulin. It actually, muscles that are working actually bypass those failing insulin receptors. So you don't need an insulin receptor when your muscles are working. Speaking of which, and I can't help but go on about exercise and this issue. Did you ever connect the dots that time and time again, in terms of heart disease, we've seen that exercise helps, and that if you get a good major workout at least 3 times a week, it helps? Well, here's the thing. this insulin impact that you describe when you go bicycling, if it's big muscles and it's intense enough, it's been shown to impact blood sugar for up to 48 hours. 48 hours, 48 hours, 48 hours, and you've got a week. You've got 6 days there. So I can't talk enough about lifestyle and managing this problem. Fort Worth, does red yeast rice effectively reduce in cardiovascular inflammation like the 5 milligram doses of Crestor? In some people, it does. Which would I take? I would take the Crestor, because the reality is you know more about what you're getting, and you know more about some of the quality control components. Our statin's just a more refined form of the supplement, of what the supplement contains, so drug companies can charge more. That's what drug companies do. They will find a supplement that's working, and they'll do some things to impact it and say, our stuff is even better than the supplement. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not. Either way, they can often make tons and tons of money on it. It's just the way it is. Does that mean that I take red yeast rice instead of a statin? No, I don't. I take a statin. And I can't tell you the amount of hater comments I get when I say, yeah, I'll take a statin. I've got plaque. I've got known plaque in my arteries. And I don't recommend statins for LDL levels. I do recommend statins if you already have plaque. And, for those of you who want to go down that bunny hole, we can. Just wanted to make one other comment. You talk about that process of companies taking supplements. That's going on exactly today with the company. I'm blanking on their name. I've talked with some of them, and I've invited them on the show. They've had some experts give me a call and talk about the form of fish oil that is now prescription. I've given it a few times, and I think it makes sense in a lot of situations. I also just I don't take it, but I do, because my triglycerides aren't over 100. But I do take it. I do take fish oil. I eat salmon. Used to eat it about 7 times a week. Now I eat it more like 10. I tend to have it 2 meals a day, many times, and sometimes 3. Tanmoy Chowdhury. How many hours of sleep I need, and every night I might take melatonin, their milligrams and magnesium supplements. Well, thank you for the comment, Tanmoy, but I'm not exactly sure how to respond to that. Jaroslav Vita, hi from Czech Republic. Jaroslav, I don't remember anybody else joining us from the Czech Republic. Thank you so much for your interest, and thank you for making us aware. Mezzanine, thoughts on the circadian rhythm and its effect on sleep, particularly relating to hormones, vitamin D, etc. So that's a whole different set of issues which are related. There's a lot of new information. One of the recent Nobel Peace Prizes in medicine had to do with exactly this, the circadian rhythm. That's the rhythm in terms of what our body does throughout the day. And we've actually described some of that. I think if I started going into discussion of insulin and blood sugar levels, blood pressure levels, ghrelin and leptin levels, all of those things would be exactly what we're talking about in terms of circadian rhythm. And poor sleep disrupts that healthy circadian rhythm. In order to have a healthy circadian rhythm, we have to have usually 7.5 hours of good sleep. Jaroslav says melatonin is a miracle. Thanks for your input. Optimum dose for melatonin. Well, those of us who have looked at melatonin, you may have seen there are some folks that talk about mega doses for melatonin. Again, I tried that as well. Melatonin just doesn't do, I haven't noticed much of an impact on me personally, so I'm not using it. I have plenty of patients that swear by it, though, Jaroslav. Paul Trainer BSC, good morning, afternoon, Liverpool. Well, there are some very famous people from Liverpool. Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing. Ex-shift worker, now retired. Now, why does Paul bring that up? For that, many people may have said, just seen that and just moved on. Shift work is a big, big deal. One of the things that's even bigger is when you're changing shifts. And I hope you weren't doing that, Paul. Changing shifts is even worse than shift work. My dad was a night postal worker most of his career, even as a supervisor, and it was challenging. What they have found, if you read the book, not Prevention Myths, but if you read the book on sleep, Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, he goes into a lot of information about shift workers having more cancers, dying earlier. Shift work is a real risk in terms of circadian rhythm. Paul Trainer always exercised weight training, but not after finishing a night shift. 1 day rest. Yep. You want to try to get your exercise not so close to when you go to sleep. Subhash Gamir, are there different kinds of vitamin D in the body? Well, there's D3 and D2. Is it like serum versus storage? Yeah, there's some of that too. In fact, one of the things that you'll tend to see is that vitamin D3 is a fat-soluble vitamin. And they're genetic. There are families that just don't absorb it very well. There's also a tendency for people that are overweight to not absorb it very well. There are gender skin color issues. You do get some vitamin D from contribution from the sun. Dark-skinned individuals get less. And people say it's also a sun-related issue. They talk about a line of latitude, and I think it's from Atlanta to San Francisco or something like that. It's fairly south, and people above that should be worried about supplements. I get plenty of people in Florida. I get people in the Southern Hemisphere. I've got patients all over the world, within the tropics. I can tell you this latitude thing, don't depend on that. Don't depend on sun to get you the vitamin D that you need. Don't do that. It's measure it. The other thing I've looked at is the amount of, should you just go ahead and supplement? I will say this, I think especially for most people, I would recommend going ahead, starting a supplement, vitamin D3, doesn't matter the brand. I have not seen a whole lot of differences between brands, but take 5,000 units, start with that. Take it a month or so, get a blood serum level of vitamin D3, and then adjust based on that. You can get enough vitamin D3 to hurt you. It can cause kidney damage. And I've actually had patients come to me who were taking too much and had some high levels. One of them was in the 120s. She actually did a video for us and shared what was going on. She had some changes in her kidney function. We immediately stopped the D3 that she was taking and got her back to a normal level, and then restarted it at a better level. What happened? What caused it? And here's one of the most common reasons you see over and over again. There's some vitamin D3 dosages that are built for weekly use, like 25, even 50,000 international units. A lot of folks will use these. A lot of caregivers will recommend it. Talk about lost in translation. This individual that came to me, and you can see it on the video. She said, "Oh, I didn't know she meant take it once a week. I thought she meant take it every day." And she was taking 25,000 units vitamin D every day. That's how she got to a blood level of 125. That's how she got some problems with her kidney function. Now, again, she came back. She was fine. Once she got to an appropriate level. That hasn't happened with everybody. there have been deaths associated with vitamin D overdose. So just know what you're doing in terms of this issue, and be careful that you know what you're taking and how you should take it. Matthew Hyman, Vasipa, Amarin. Thank you, Matthew. You may have noticed I was avoiding both of those terms. It wasn't because I didn't want to mention them. It was because, senior moments. Thank you. Vasipa was the oil. It's made by Amarin, and it comes from fish oil. And they've done a few things to really increase the EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid. Their perspective is that some of the other oils in there that are supposed to be, quote, healthy, may be replacing the EPA on receptors in our body. And they make a good case for that. Has it been proven? Not yet. So again, so many interesting things happening in science today. But again, to remind you, we talked about how big pharma will find supplements that work and go in, tweak them, and make a lot of money off of them. And you can say, well, because they're making a whole lot of money, I'm not going to do it. Well, do so at your own risk. I don't personally take Vasipa, but I do give it to patients with that have a need. One of the significant needs has to do with triglyceride values that are too high, that can't be impacted by lifestyle, or we don't have time to impact them by lifestyle. And we can get into that for those of you who are interested. UK, Liverpool. Again, I think I thought what I was referring to was the Beatles. I thought that's where they were from. Thank you for identifying. Fort Worth, West Side. I think the biggest resistance to statins, I was one previously, is the hype that you said about LDL. When I heard about your info and about its effect on reducing inflammation, I quickly changed my mind. Fort Worth, thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing that. I appreciate you sharing that with others. To me, there was another issue. I was a statin avoider for a couple of years myself. And for me, it was, some of the perceived side effects. So one of the things I will tell you is that I rarely recommend statins in the high or even moderate level. I will in some cases. I tend to use lower level statins because the lower dose statins impact the inflammation that Fort Worth West Side is talking about. Bert Robinson, tuning in late. Hello, Bart. Good to see you, and glad to have you here. Paul Trainer, Circadian Rhythm, Aviation Medicine, and NASA Space Research University Library, Liverpool. Oh, okay, great. Thank you very much for making us aware. Fort Worth, I think if cardiologists would just concentrate on the inflammation reduction aspect from such small doses, so many more people would be likely converted in their thinking. I agree, Fort Worth. So, Fernando, injecting insulin from 25 milligrams, jumping it to 30 milligrams, and still not getting sugar under 200. Taking metformin, I think he meant metformin, twice a day. Does that mean I'm in stage 1? No, yes, it means you're diabetic, but stage 1 is a different issue. I think we may be confusing a couple of things. There's type 1 diabetes, and type 1 diabetes is your pancreas doesn't make enough insulin. It's usually, the mechanism appears to be that something immune happened and your own immune system wiped out your beta cells of your pancreas, so you can't really make insulin anymore. That tends to happen. That tends to be the diabetics that turn diabetic when they were in their teens or younger. Although there's a deeper story than that, which I won't get into. Type 2 isn't that you don't make insulin; it's that your insulin receptors in the cell membranes of your liver and muscles are resistant to insulin. So totally two different mechanisms, two different types. I hope that helps. And yes, there are some stages which we'll cover later if there's a request. Gosh, you know what? I'm having a challenge, folks. A lot of great questions, a lot of good topics, but I have a 12:30 and it's 12:18 our time. So I apologize. I am going to have to sign off without covering all the topics, all the questions. Aspen, if you could go ahead and give us the exit